Hi there, my name is Carmen Dreichel. I'm the Community and Indigenous Relations Manager for Fortis BC, working in service of communities here on beautiful Vancouver Island and the Sunshine Coast. It's my pleasure to introduce today's session, Leadership is Essential. Through the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen incredible examples of very strong leadership throughout Vancouver Island communities, from the big and early and ongoing decision making on how to keep our communities safe, to leaders who have mobilized in supporting communities and families at the ground level where their daily lives are being impacted. I raise my hands to you, to the strong leaders and to the elected officials here today who actively participate in building strong community. Fortis BC is proud to sponsor today's session and to play a role in building a strong island economy. While you're here at the summit on the virtual platform, come visit our exhibitor booth. We look forward to connecting with you. Have a safe and wonderful day.
Hi, welcome today. As we begin, I want to recognize that I live and work on the unceded Coast Salish territories, specifically of the Algonquin and Wasanek peoples, and I honor the history and strength of the Coast Salish peoples and their teachings. I'm Christy Rivet, co-founder of Scale Collaborative. Scale Collaborative strives to create a thriving, connected, and financially resilient social change sector on Vancouver Island and beyond. Scale supports social purpose organizations to become financially resilient and strong to scale the positive impact they are having. Scale also works at the systems level to create and grow the social enterprise, social procurement, and social finance ecosystem. I'm excited to moderate today's session because this is such an important topic now more than ever. Political leadership is essential, and who we elect into office has huge impacts. We've witnessed great leadership with outstanding successes and other leadership with alarming failures during this pandemic, and we can see the impact of those different leaders on people. We also know that public office comes with positive and negative sides, for some more than others, when they serve as elected officials, from personal attacks to unrelenting demands. So how do we inspire a new generation of public servants? Today's session will hear from different public servants on the different types of leadership that can best serve our communities. Today's session will dig into the real life stories of different elected officials, and we will hear from an organization dedicated to supporting electing more young people. During the conversation with panelists, if you have a question, feel free to put it in the Q&A that's located below at the middle of your screen. VIEA is moderating that, and there will be a Q&A opportunity with the panelists after. Please also join the roundtable at 4 p.m. today to deepen understanding, generate ideas for solving problems, and pursuing opportunities on how we inspire a new generation of elected leaders. Let's meet the panelists. We have Erilyn Joseph, counselor at Snuneymuxw First Nation. Counselor Joseph graduated Niagara University, New York, with a bachelor in political science and criminal justice. She went on to graduate UBC Law School and became a lawyer in 2015. Counselor Joseph began her career in public service 10 years ago when she was elected to the BC Assembly of First Nations Female Youth Representative, executive on the Assembly of First Nations National Youth Council, and an Indigenous intern with the province of British Columbia and the First Nations Summit. She's worked with chiefs of British Columbia, regional chiefs across Canada, government, and stakeholders to address the realities, quality of life, and interest of First Nations young people through advocacy and public policy. Counselor Joseph has served in a number of directorships and volunteer positions, and for the past 6 years, she is counselor for Snuneymuxw First Nation and president of Petroglyph Development Group, which is the business and economic development arm of the Snuneymuxw peoples. She joins the centuries-long effort put forth by her ancestors, elders, and relatives to remove colonial injustice in the daily lives of the Snuneymuxw peoples, enhancing equal opportunities that improve their quality of life, strengthen the economy, and unleash business and economic opportunities that respect Snuneymuxw values and cultures. Welcome, Councillor Joseph.
Thank you. Siemna Siaya, Siemna Sofomo, Intepe Hanquithia, Tanit Tanat Stanemo, Eat Sab U Aliao. Good day, everybody. My name is Erilyn Joseph. I'm here in our territories of Stanemo First Nation. Welcome to all of you who come today to witness this panel in Stanemo First Nations territory and beyond. I'm honored to be here to discuss this topic, this very important topic with you, supporting leadership within our young people and tapping into that resource to bring our young people to the table, to the decisions that really affect their lives. So I'm looking forward to today and having this discussion with you, Christy, and my fellow panelists.
Thank you. Our next panelist is Robert Fillmore. He's a counselor at the town of Qualicum Beach. Councillor Fillmore was born and raised in Qualicum Beach. He discovered his many passions during his 7 years in the Royal Canadian Air Cadets. He completed the program with strong accomplishments in the field of aviation and leadership. In 2018, at the age of 20, Councillor Fillmore was elected councillor to the town of Qualicum Beach, the youngest person ever to be elected official in the region. He is the chairperson for the town's Parks, Recreation, and Culture, as well as the Environmental and Sustainability Committee. He has continued his career work within operations at Harbour Air Seaplanes, integrity, protecting history, and creating space for systematically underrepresented gender and sexual minorities are some of Councillor Fillmore's core values. Welcome, Councillor Fillmore. Oh, we'll just get you off of mute there, Councillor Fillmore, because we'd love to hear what inspired you to become a public servant. Let me see about that muting, because we have you on mute still. Can you want to try talking again? Okay, I'm going to let some of the techie folks at the back end work on that while we introduce our next panelist. It does look like you're not on mute, just so that we know. So our next panelist is Sherry Minions, Mayor of Port Alberni. As the youngest mayor ever on Vancouver Island, Mayor Minions is carving a new path for Port Alberni's future. She is born and raised in the Alberni Valley. Mayor Minions is passionate about her community and dedicated to building a vibrant waterfront city that fosters innovation, inclusion, and opportunity. In her personal endeavors, Mayor Minion continues to manage a team of mortgage brokers. She also owns a very successful vegan restaurant in Tofino and recently opened a trendy new restaurant in Port Alberni's Uptown Arts District, demonstrating her faith in her community's future. With a kind heart and steadfast vision, Mayor Minions embodies the change she envisions for her community. Welcome, Mayor Minions.
Thank you. And I always wonder which of my wonderful staff people at the City of Port Alberni wrote that bio. Thank you so much for having me here today. And thanks really for hosting this session. This is a topic I'm very passionate about. I did one term on city council, and as we'll probably talk about a bit later, I really decided to run almost on a whim, just from a few people encouraging me. I sometimes look back and think, had I known exactly what I was getting myself into, I don't think I would have opted to run at the time that I did, but I'm so glad that I did, because it just, it led me to a whole world of things that I was passionate about and really had no idea. So I am so thrilled to be here today and just really proud to be in the position that I am, having an opportunity to help build a community that I've born and raised in, and I'm so passionate about. So thanks for having me, and look forward to connecting more on these issues.
Thanks, Mayor Minions. And finally, joining us today is Gavin Drew. Gavin Drew is the founder of the Forum of Millennium Leadership, a nonpartisan group that works to engage and elect young people regardless of party, ideology, or level of government. With millenniums now forming the largest cohort of potential voters in BC, Forum for Millennial Leadership wants to strengthen their representation. While the Forum is Gavin's volunteer side hustle, his main day job is as Chief Strategic Advisor to Abbotsford's Tech District, a proposed innovation district designed to help secure Abbotsford's place as the agricultural, technology, and food security hub of BC. The project would see billions of dollars in private sector capital invested in Abbotsford over several decades. As an entrepreneur, executive, and advisor to decision makers in large companies and organizations, Gavin has been involved with navigating some of the most complex and challenging commercial and political environments in Canada, with billions of dollars of investment and thousands of jobs at stake. Gavin has a BA from UBC and an MBA from Oxford, where he wrote a thesis on social license, which is how companies gain permission from communities to do things. He serves on the boards of Business Council of British Columbia and the Veterans Transition Network. He is a proud father and soon to be of 2. Welcome, Gavin.
Thanks, Christy. The last part's obviously the most important. I think if you look at my fellow panelists, if you look at Sherry and Robert and Erilyn, you'll know why we should elect young people. It's really important that we see generational renewal in the folks that are elected at all levels of government across all parties. I came to believe that as someone who had been involved in the political process. I had helped other candidates. I had been a candidate, albeit not successfully running for office. And I came to the belief that it was really important that we do more, not only to tell the story of why we need to elect more young people, but also to support young people who are running for office, to make sure that they know that their service is being asked for, is being wanted, and is necessary, and to make sure that they're equipped with the skills necessary to be successful doing that. So that's what I was focused on when I set up the Forum for Millennial Leadership. What we do is basically 3 things. We do research, looking at opinion research, looking at the breakdown of legislative entities across Canada in order to tell the story of how generations are or are not represented. We communicate that research, again, to tell the story through social and traditional media. And then we also do work to help support and prepare candidates as they consider running for office, and in particular, encourage people to consider running for office if they're initially reluctant. So again, I'm very proud to be on a panel with these three fine folks who are serving their communities.
Yeah, maybe we'll just check in with Councillor Fillmore. How is that recording going?
I think I've.
Yay!
There we go.
Fantastic. There we go. So what inspired you to come into politics? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. I think, I was elected at the age of 20. I decided to run when I was 16. And when I was 16, that would have been the election prior. When I saw the same leadership get elected again, and it would have been the same leadership for 20 years in Qualicum Beach. And as someone that has been born and raised in Qualicum Beach, my family's history is in Qualicum Beach. It started to get the ball rolling of how can we change this? And I've always been one person when I was in the Air Cadet program in high school, and then every other part of my life. If you're going to complain, do something about it. Just don't complain. If you're going to complain, you better do something about it. So I said, well, the morning after the election, I was 16, I walked into the kitchen and I said, Mom, I'm running next time. She said, Robert, just calm down. About 2 years later, I started attending every single council meeting, and I never missed a single one. And then in 2018, I pounded a sign into the ground, and 2 months later, I was elected into office. So it was a very, I wouldn't say a snap decision. It was a very long-term goal, I'd say. I set the goal out there, and it was a great experience.
Thank you. Well, it seems that people have these generally caring reasons of why they get into politics. And so I'd love to dive a little bit into some of the realities of what you face as elected officials. So maybe we can talk a bit around, some of the more challenging aspects. It's great to sort of think those through and learn how your experience in navigating those challenges can help us to inspire a new generation that's maybe interested or even thinking about public service. So one of the things that comes up a bit and that we see, especially through social media, is personal attacks. And, they can be really relentless, and they can be difficult. And so just sort of wanted to, open that up to the group around personal attacks. And maybe I could ask yourself, Councillor Joseph, have you faced any sort of personal attacks as trying to get elected or as a public servant? And if so, what do you do when something like that happens?
Definitely, thank you for the question. And what inspired me to become into public office is a number of reasons, but more so the leadership and kinship networks of my family, my grandfathers, my grandmothers, my mothers, and even my ancestors as well. So there is a history of cultural and political leadership in our family, and I had a goal early on while I was in high school and Couch and secondary here to become a lawyer and come home to serve our Nanaimo people, to give back to our community. And it's been very positive in the way of being elected as a leader, but also away from this position, there's ample opportunities to give back and to our community and support the next generation to come to the table, to be part of the decisions that affect their daily lives. But certainly in that journey, there has been, especially during the campaign process and even during the serving the term, there's public attacks, public and personal attacks that occur. And what I chalk that up to being is just the democratic institution of the Indian Act, colonial system, and everything else is very adversarial in nature, where people tend to point out mistakes that have occurred in the past or create stories and try to make it really public to really diminish your standing within the elections. And that if in our culture it's more so cultural values and morals, where we would have an inheritance system where somebody would come to lead our family, whether that be an elder or someone who have different roles in our family. That's the leadership model that we have in a cultural context, as opposed to a democratic system where we elect people that does allow the people to have their voices heard through an election. But at the same time, it does have a negative effect on the process, and it could deter certain young people who may not be weathered enough to withstand those kinds of challenges at such a young age. I know I went through that a number of times, reflecting on my purpose and what my vision and what my career goals are, and where I want to be when I become a senior and I become in that position where, I may be an elder and have to guide our nation. So I keep that at the forefront while we're going through all the personal attacks. There is an obvious effect that you carry that with you. And it's very important that young people have the supports around them, a good network, a good support system to always convey that reality, that positive reality of the young person's contribution to not only themselves with their personal development, but with their relationship with the community and anyone else. So certainly I have not been immune to personal attacks, and It's because of my great support system around me and the resources that I have that I feel renewed and refreshed to continue on this journey.
And do personal attacks, do they just continue as you are an elected official? Like, does that just something that just becomes part of your day and you just are like you just have to put it off and
Definitely.
tap into that support system?
Definitely. It doesn't stop in public service. Unfortunately, you have a million eyes on you all the time, even when you're not looking, even behind you, beside, everywhere. And for young people, we're often more criticized than I would say the more seasoned public servants who has been in the career for 20, 30 years. Perfect examples with Bowen Ma and Mrs. The sitting Liberal representative in that riding, where there was some controversial statements made that perhaps would not generally, in my view, my respectful view, had the young candidate been around the same age as the sitting MLA, that would not have been levied against her. So it's those kinds of perspectives that especially if you're a woman, that sometimes come to the forefront. And rather than going to that place, it would be better to support the young people to come to the table. That's not a threat. We're not threatening you. There's no intimidation. You know, we want to work with you. We want to be mentored by you. We want to learn how things are the way they are, find our interest within that position, what if it's policy or whatever, a recreational goal, whatever the interest is, and we support one another to advance our constituents, but mostly, in my respect, our nation.
Thank you. I really appreciate you sharing that with us. Gavin, I'm curious, in your work with the Forum of Millennium Leaderships, is there any research that you've sort of been able to dig a bit deeper into these sort of personal attacks?
Yeah, that's a great question, Christy. So one of the things that we did is we actually commissioned a survey a couple of years ago where we asked people a wide variety of questions, including some questions designed to elicit why people might choose or not choose to run for office. And some of the themes that were in there were very interesting. So, for example, an overwhelming number of people, about 75% of people, believe that running for office would mean a loss of their family and their privacy and their family's privacy. People obviously believe it would take them away from their family. There's some very interesting dynamics where people believe that to seek elected office is to risk being seen as a bad person. Which is very, very interesting. I'm sure I see, smiles around the Zoom room. I've talked to a number of elected officials who've told me the story of, they decide to put their name forward for office and everyone says, that's just fantastic. It's great that you're, committing to service. It's great that you're doing this. And sometimes the same people about a month later go, oh, well, you're just a politician now, you're in it for yourself. So there's a difficult dynamic there in terms of the way that we think about politics and politicians. And I think some of that really gets metabolized into the way that people think about what being in politics means for them. And as it relates particularly to young people, I think some of that gets into the idea of kind of whether or not they'll be taken seriously or whether or not they have the experience and capability of serving. So for example, one of the recurring motifs that we've seen back in our research is that people want to see young people step up and lead. About 75% of British Columbians and the same number of Canadians think it's time for young people to step up and lead in politics. And in fact, that sentiment is even stronger among the 55 plus set who want to see generational renewal. But despite that demand for renewal, there's a confidence gap where young people, and women in particular, feel as if, as a young candidate, they would not be taken seriously. Or when we ask people whether or not you would ever consider running for office, do you believe that you are qualified? There's about a 20% plus confidence gap between men and women on that front. So in particular for young women, there is that sense of I won't be taken seriously. There is that sense of I'm not ready, we've all heard the stories that it takes, 7 asks to try to convince a young woman, especially, to run for office. And I think those are very much true. That's been my experience. I've talked to extremely qualified young women who would make exceptional elected officials and being told, well, there's just no room for me. And I think, we have to make sure that we're building capacity and building resiliency, especially as it relates to those personal attacks, which is why, for example, we often do media training sessions for people that are running for office for the first time to help them be resilient when they are attacked and help them kind of get through it. But with that said, we also have to strike a balance where, especially in the era of social media, if you're being attacked constantly and attacked over and over again, you develop resiliency, you harden yourself to withstand those attacks. But how do you do that while also remaining open and compassionate to not only all sides of your community, but also to important and valid counter arguments that might not be coming from a place of personal attack, but in fact of good, legitimate criticism of ideas. So that's a really, really tough balance that we need to strike in this era. And I think it's even harder for young candidates and young politicians who are more exposed than anyone to social media.
Yeah, I'd love to, think about that on both sides, from that sort of youth side and from the female side. So Councillor Fillmore, I'd love to, you being the youngest councillor that was ever voted in your region, 20 years old is a young age. So did you feel that how were you able to get past, did you feel that you felt any sort of considerations around your age? Did that affect your thoughts if you could get elected? Did you see that playing out at all in the polls? And how did you sort of overcome, make the decision to actually do it at such a young age?
Yeah, no, I thank you for that. I appreciate the question. It's a good discussion to have. I started campaigning, I guess when I was 18 is when I really started campaigning. And I knew that I was going to need a really good campaign manager. I was going to need someone behind me that could not only lead me the way, but keep me going if I started to push myself back. So I went to the second youngest person ever to be elected in our region. And I said, his name's Chris Berger. He was the mayor of Parksville for many years, but he was elected mid to late 20s in Quality Beach back in 1996. I went to Mr. Berger and I said, can you run my campaign? He said, no problem. So we started running my campaign, and the biggest thing he said, you're going to need to show that you really want this. And he said, the best thing you're going to be able to do is knock on every door. So I said, okay, well, I've never done door knocking before. So we went out door knocking, and he said, I'll show you. And I think he only did about 5 doors with me. And he said, all right, off you go. And that's how I did it. And I knocked on almost every door in the community. We've got a community of almost 10,000 residents, and I knocked on almost every door. And the biggest thing I heard on the doorstep was, you're not old enough. And I said, okay, that might be your opinion. But if I'm old enough to vote, why can't I sit in office? And as soon as that discussion started, it did turn minds. And as for attacks during the campaign, I didn't face a lot of attacks during the campaign. I can say that. I've definitely faced age attacks while sitting in office. More or less because as I'm young, I still have to hold a full-time job. This job, unfortunately, does not pay you to just sit in office all day. So you have to hold a full-time job. And when residents and citizens are not normally used to having younger people in office that hold a job, they're used to that retirement or older age demographic that's sitting in office, and they have a lot more time to be able to respond to emails, phone calls, meet with you. When you hold a full-time job, unfortunately, you have to find that balance. And so I get a lot of complaints of, you haven't returned my phone call yet. You haven't responded to my email. Why can't you meet with me tomorrow? And that is a very large struggle. As well, for a young person, especially at my age now of 22, I have a personal life. And as a 22-year-old male, you like to go with your friends. You like to be able to, to have a weekend sometimes. And being able to balance 3 or 4 parts of your life at once is quite difficult. And speaking on that topic of attacks in office, I'm also a member of the LGBTQ2S+ community. And when you're in that part of the community as a young person, it creates a whole different type of attack. And I've also faced many of those types of attacks as well.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. And how about when we talk about that balance and that, you know, if we think about personal attacks as well, if we look to Mayor Minion's, you know, as a how do you consider the timing with family and what those attacks might do to your family? Like, did you have to go through a thought process? What was that sort of like for you?
I did not go through enough of a thought process. You know, when I was 26 when I ran for council. I did one term on council and then ran for mayor. And I ran because people encouraged me. I had only very recently started to pay attention to, you know, what was going on in my community. I just moved back. I was born and raised in Port Alberni, but I had been living in Victoria until, you know, very recently before I ran for council. And I moved back and I started to appreciate the things about Port Alberni that I, you know, maybe didn't appreciate growing up. And then I really started to see the potential. So I started getting engaged and seeing what was going on in our community. And very quickly I realized that nobody was really representing my demographic, and nobody was really looking at how do we bring more young families to this community, which has been a challenge in Port Alberni for a long time. So I started to get encouraged by people to run, I think because I was maybe the only young person at the time who seemed to really be interested in what was going on in Port Alberni. And, you know, I say all the time, if I would have known what I was getting into, I certainly wouldn't have done it, but I'm so glad that I did. I had just one child when I decided to run. I was pregnant with my son. He was born a couple weeks before I was elected. And I faced a lot of criticism in my campaign because I was very, very visibly pregnant at the time. You know, people just talking about how I wouldn't have time. You know, there's no way I could make it work with my personal life. And, you know, I think, again, looking back, it really wasn't the ideal time for me to run because this job is really not suited to having a young family. And that's a challenge. You know, we always hear people say we need more young people. We need more young elected officials, but we haven't made the job work for young people. So when I was elected, of course, you know, I had a very young, brand new newborn baby, and I was actually elected to a council of 7 people where I was the only woman. So as a young woman with a newborn baby, there were some awkward times, you know, just feeling uncomfortable myself, and, you know, needing to all of a sudden have breaks in our council meetings so that I could nurse my baby. And I was really fortunate to have a super accommodating and understanding council of 6 men who bent over backwards to, you know, make sure that I had whatever I need and was comfortable. And I really am thankful that I, you know, was faced with that versus what other people in that situation have been faced with in the past. But we made a lot of changes during that time to suit me. And a lot of those changes we ended up making permanent, whether it was meeting times or, you know, an automatic break or things like that. And luckily we did, because I ended up having another baby in my first term on council as well. And my husband and I did, we adopted my niece as well during that time. So there was a lot of change in our family. And I think that I was very fortunate to have a council that was supportive of that. And I just kept saying along the way, though, not everybody is as fortunate as I am to have a council that is understanding and does make sure I have whatever, you know, time I need to be with my family. But this job is just not right off the bat meant for this point in our lives. And that certainly does discourage a lot of people from getting involved. And I think the more we can talk about this, the more that we can start to address some of these issues. I think there's a willingness there. People, you know, whether it's old men, young men, women, you know, people have a want to see more people, to a more, you know, balanced demographic represented, more First Nations, you know, Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. We want our elected officials to look like our communities, and we want to see ourselves in them. So I think that these conversations are so important to just, you know, to help get us there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So maybe we'll dive a little bit into diversity then. How do we address diversity as a public servant? Maybe I'll start. Let's start, Councillor Fillmore. How would you address diversity?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a great topic and great discussion. So thank you for the question. Like I said earlier, as a diversity, now it's tough. It's really tough in Qualicum Beach to discuss diversity because we're a council of 5, and we're a council of 5 white males. So when we start talking about diversity, it is very tough. When we ran, I believe there was, I think, 11 candidates on slate. Out of the 11, only 2 were women. One was an incumbent, and one was a new candidate on the slate. Unfortunately, neither got elected. One was for mayor, one was for council. So 5 males got elected, and it created, right off the bat, some flack. And when we started looking at what diversity we have on council, I don't always look at just gender. I look at age, I look at your ethnicity, your sexual orientation. All those types of things is diversity. They're all parts of that. As a young male, as a young gay male, I think that Qualicum Beach has addressed that diversity part of it. In June of this year, I did a very large, or not large, but I did a public coming out as officially announcing myself as the first gay councillor in Qualicum Beach. Not thinking, now that one I didn't fully process. I didn't really think, how is this going to go over? I more or less just said, I'm going to do this. And overall, it was accepted extremely well in Qualicum Beach. Qualicum Beach is known as a very old, conservative, old-fashioned municipality. It doesn't come to a shock to anyone, so I've got no problem saying it. But not only did I put an article in the paper and the paper do a story, but the rest of the council decided, you know what, we're going to declare a week in June as our Pride Week, and we're going to raise a flag, and we're really going to go the extra step. And I think that's a perfect way of addressing it, is not giving the choice. We're just going to do it. We're going to make a decision, and we're going to do it. And it, it worked. We're still 5 white males, but that diversity of age and sexuality is definitely there.
It sounds like it's the brave people that go first, and then the youth that can follow in those footsteps.
And that's that's almost that's why I did it too, is to show, to give a voice to people that may not have found that voice yet. And as leaders, I look at that as your job as a leader. So
I would just note that in both of those stories, both Sherry and Robert, the story there is that you've got young elected officials that are taking leadership, that are stepping up, that are doing this, and you have fellow councillors who are choosing to support them. And I think that's really, really important. This stuff doesn't just work if we say, hey, young people ought to run. Hey, it would be nice to see young people ran. It works when we have people who embrace that change, who embrace pulling people in, and who are supportive in that way. And it's really important that we acknowledge the efforts that those people are taking, because this really isn't about old versus young. It's about continuity, succession, inclusion, and that's something that really brings together everyone in an elected body. So that's really important to acknowledge.
Thank you for adding that, Gavin. And Councillor Joseph, anything that you'd have to add of how we can support underrepresented groups, Indigenous communities and nations, that ways that we can support for higher levels of diversity in politics?
Definitely. I just want to say I'm very proud of you, Councillor Fillmore, for what you've done and the path that you've blazed. And, I'm a 100% supporter of you and where you've gone. I just really appreciate your story. I grew up with a lot of friends in high school who are similarly situated and had sexual orientations that are different than mine. And it wasn't an issue for us, but it comes to a point where you integrate into society outside of high school, and it seems that's where the rub was. And that was my experience, and I have many friends and relatives who have who find their personality in different ways, and is very much embraced. But certainly for Indigenous people and diversity, there's a whole history of racism that continues to this day to our people, our Snuneymuxw people, but Indigenous people abroad, everywhere, within the healthcare system, the criminal justice system, within the education system. and some within political systems. So it's very well known, and my position on addressing it is calling it out for what it is. And there is such thing as white privilege, and myself in my athletic career, in my educational journey, and even in my professional career right now, I still experience it at differing levels. But it's very important that we address it and call it out and create space at tables to talk about it frankly, transparently, respectfully, and that we get to a point of solutions. For example, for me, when I first started out as a president of Petrogliffe Development Group, we operate a forestry division, and I often found myself at decision-making tables with men who have been in the industry for like 30 years. And there wasn't much room to move. You really had to always put your hand up. And that's one point. Always put your hand up, always have your voice heard in a respectful, reasonable way, of course. But that always was the trend for me when I first started out in that role. And we oversee a whole bunch of divisions. But it's very important that there is space within the legislature in Victoria and Ottawa to address these systemic racist habits, perspectives, and operations that Canada and British Columbia have had since 1871, when the Terms of Union came to play and Confederation of Canada occurred. That's really when it happened for Indigenous people with the imposition of the Indian Act. We transitioned to denial of Snuneymuxw people, denial of our rights, denial of our culture. We couldn't gather together in our longhouses. We weren't allowed to practice our language. We were taken away to residential schools. Our ancestors went through the 60s scoop, and some people who are living here today. So there's a long history of over 165 years where Indigenous people have experienced racist behavior, policy, decisions in this country. And I think integral to addressing that, not only in Ottawa and British Columbia, but see it in action. For example, British Columbia announced the new legislation on recognizing United Nations declarations on the rights of Indigenous peoples, and that all laws of British Columbia are going to be harmonized with that. That's fundamental on the policy level, but on the ground where it affects our daily lives today, tomorrow, and the next day, conversations such as these are very important because it allows it opens up the space and the soul for the young Indigenous person to think, I'm being heard and my voice is being heard simply because it's being talked about. I would say probably a while, the history has shown that the door is shut on this discussion. There's no racism, complete denial. Whereas today in 2020, almost entering 2021, we're actually talking about it. And that's very important for the sense of belonging for young Indigenous people, their self-worth, their self-will to continue on with their thought that they had when they were, an adolescent or whenever it was. I want to speak for our people. I want to be in that role, to allow them to continue on with their dreams. So I think that's important for us a step to address diversity is talking about it and taking legislation, policy, programming, whatever action to give effect to what we're saying.
Thanks, Councillor Joseph. Really appreciate that. Gavin, is there anything, we're almost at our Q&A, and this is such an interesting conversation that I really want to continue, and we'll be able to do that with the audience through some of their questions. Maybe we could touch quickly on extreme partisanism. And I kind of want to just dive in a little bit, Mayor Minions, how do you as, as a young female mayor, how do you bring your council together, and how do you start working as a real team?
Sure. So I think that I would say that we don't have an issue with extreme partisanism on our council, which is really interesting because we actually do have, some quite extreme partisanism within our council, but it really doesn't come to the council table. And whereas we certainly did see that in the last council I was a part of. So I really attribute that to how my council started off. And I know I've shared this story with you before, but my last council that I was a part of, we went into our strategic planning within weeks of being elected. And we were 5 out of 7 brand new people to the positions. Our mayor was brand new. We really at that point didn't even know what our role or job was as a councillor. And all of a sudden we were trying to dive into building a plan that was supposed to guide the next 4 years of our term. And I think we really fell apart at that point because we didn't build a plan that was realistic or that represented the values that we believed in, or we didn't come together on a vision. So when I was elected and our council naturally started talking about strategic planning, I asked that we slow down. I first wanted to get to know my council. For me, relationships are so important, and I don't think that we really can come together on a vision that we're going to, a common vision for how we're going to govern and lead our community over our term when we don't even know each other, when we don't, we don't have an appreciation for what drove each of us to run for this position. We don't understand their backgrounds. And so we really took the time first to get to know each other. We went through a budget term just because of the nature of the election cycle. We went through our first budget year with no strategic plan, having no real common vision on what we were doing. And so it ended up being somewhat of a status quo budget. And a lot of people criticized us for that because they said you're wasting a year of a 4-year term. But at the end of the day, I think that we're going to be a lot more successful as a council. And I certainly feel that we have been. I feel very fortunate to work with every member of my council because we ended up through that process coming together on a very common vision that we believe so strongly in. And, from somebody who is completely opposite from me on the political spectrum, and in every way of life, one person on my council, Councillor Paulson, and a fantastic councillor who's become a good friend of mine, could not be more opposite than me in every way. And we believe strongly in the values and the vision that we've built for our community. And I think because we have that vision that we all have come together to build and really felt a part of, we don't experience the partisanism. We're able to put that aside and really just, focus ourselves back on what we're trying to achieve for our community. So it's been really successful, and we're really proud of the work we've done as a council.
Thanks, Mayor Minions. It's really interesting to think about the importance of those relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And potentially those intergenerational relationships that can support the young leaders of tomorrow to come aboard and become our elected officials of the future.
Absolutely.
So I'd really like to open it up to the Q&A with our audience and continue this really engaging conversation and allow the audience to be part of that as well. So Gavin, one of the first questions we've got is around that we've just had an election, BC election, and wanting to understand the research, if there's any sort of correlation between pulling the youth vote. So how many of those shares of votes that come through are the youth, and the correlation as to who gets elected?
Yeah, there's a few key things that I would say on that, a couple of trends. The first is this. We have seen an increase in young voter turnout, both federally and provincially, over the last set of elections. And one of the most notable components of that turnout has actually been among 18 to 24-year-old voters who've really been surging. So for example, if we look at the difference provincially between the 2017 election and the 2013 election, overall voter turnout was up, I'm going to say about 3.8 or 4%. And the turnout among 18 to 24s was actually twice that increase. So key trend, really young voters are coming out. I think it was clear that with some of their very young candidates, that's who the Green Party was chasing in this provincial election. So you're seeing that turnout increase. You're also seeing really interesting trends in terms of who gets to run for office, where they get to run for office, which is really important, and what the outcomes are. So, there was a really interesting breakdown if we look at what happened over the course of this election in terms of what the parties were putting forward in terms of a generational and a gender offering. So At the end of the election, what we saw is this. In British Columbia, 35% of the eligible voters are under 40 and 43% are under 45. Now that 35% of voters under 40 has 10% of the legislature. So there are 9 MLAs under 40 in the legislature. There's a fair degree of underrepresentation there. Frankly, there's a pretty big difference in terms of the partisan breakdown by generation. In 2017, the NDP elected 8 MLAs under 40 and the BC Liberals elected 0. And in this election, assuming the results hold, the NDP elected 8 MLAs under 40 and the BC Liberals elected 1. So there's a real differential there in terms of young people being elected, and frankly, in terms of young women in particular being elected. And I think there's certainly a lot of work to be done in that regard. And I would stress this, it's not enough just to put forward young people in elections or people of color or women. What matters is that we're putting them forward in ridings where they can actually be elected and they can actually represent and serve in the legislature.
So one of the questions is around pay, really, and the realities of what that looks like, especially at the municipal and First Nations Council level. The provincial and federal might be a little bit more. And so the realities of what that really means for young people today. Do you feel it's a barrier? Councillor Fillmore.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was first elected, one of the very first things, it's going to sound really bad, but one of the very first things we did as a council was a pay raise. It should have been the last council that did it. It was a discussion they had saying, you know what, we should get this pay done before the next council rolls in. But it's tough when you go into something like that in election year, because it's never something that goes over easy with the public. So when we were first elected, we did it within our first year. And it was not easy to comprehend for the public. But when you start discussing, when Qualicum Beach, when they elected the new council, they elected me at 20, they elected another councillor, I believe, at the age of 34, and then up from there, the next councillor was 40. So there's 3 fairly young councillors, 2 of which were holding full-time jobs. When you hold a full-time job and you come into this type of job, you have to take time away from your other job. But as a young person, you have to be able to live. You don't, and a lot of times, myself, you don't have an extra income coming into your household because you're not married or you don't have a partner or a spouse. So I think pay is a deterrent to younger people getting into office. To me, it wasn't, I didn't even think about pay. Honestly, I don't even think I knew what the councillors got paid when I was running, because I don't think I really paid attention to it, because it didn't matter to me what I got paid and whatnot. But once I had to start taking time away from my job to do this job, you start to think, well, okay, I'm not able to do what I need to be doing. So, it is a deterrent, I think, but sometimes you bite the bullet, you have the power to do something, you just have to do it.
Councillor Joseph, do you have some creative ways that you help support, like on the First Nations councils around, maybe having to have extra jobs on the side to be able to do this kind of service?
Certainly, that it's generally a day in the life of a young person starting out a career, and public service is no exception. And having fair wage grids and fair remuneration for services provided is very important to everyone, not just young people. And whether that's merit-based, experience-based, or there's other assets that the individual has that could be quantified. So taking all 3 of those and other factors that organization uses is very important. For Snuneymuxw, it has been fair for us. We started on honoraria system. Now we have a monthly system set up here that's fairly reasonable in our perspective, and as well as my position as the executive advisor to the chief right now, that's fairly, it's fair, and I'm very fortunate in that way to bring my education and experience and my skill set that's valued and recognized.
Thank you. So, and really on that point around that, sometimes that public life not, perfectly aligning with young leaders and their need to, maintain a full-time job, complete their education, raise a family, these all this timing questions, what are some of the practical things that municipal councillors or different levels of government can do better to accommodate the unique pressures on young candidates? Gavin, have you guys done any research on that? Like what, maybe the top 3 things that you might have seen that youth need?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a couple of pieces. Firstly, I think it's about recognizing that it's not just about doing the job, it's about campaigning for the job. So if somebody is going to campaign in a serious and competitive election and get elected, they're probably taking months off from their job. And frankly, having been there and done that, you run an election, and if you win, that's great, you've got a job. If you lose, there's no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. There's no magical new job waiting for you. And sometimes, quite honestly, you might well be leaving a job. And now, crassly, you have the taint of politics around you. You're a politician now. And it actually can be very challenging to kind of go back into whatever your work may be, depending on the nature of your work. So I think it's important to recognize there's that piece. I think it's also about the practical logistics of being an elected official. And in particular, I would highlight the structural burdens that young parents and young mothers in particular face. So we did do some research on that, and we did ask some questions around it. I think that there is and there should be support for example, parental leaves for elected officials. I think that we can always improve supports around things like very simple things, change tables, nursing facilities, logistical things, within city halls and other places where elected officials are serving, and things like even childcare for elected officials who are parents. There are some of those programs available on a very, very kind of scattered basis at different levels of government. There are certainly best practices. Quite honestly, there are some really difficult political dynamics around this. I mentioned my wife ran for city council with a 3-month-old, and you sort of see some of the double standard in play, where it sure is great that you're running as a parent. It sure is great, Mayor Minions, that you're a young parent and you can understand the challenges that we young parents are going through. But hey, why aren't you working 80 hours a week for us? Mm-hmm. Or, why are you taking this leave? Because there may well be permission to take a leave. There may well be acceptance to take a leave, but there are always politics around being absent. And I know a significant number of young women in particular who are elected officials who either have struggled with that as elected officials, and that's a perspective I'm sure that Mayor Minions can share much more directly than I can, and equally importantly, who have either struggled while campaigning or who have struggled with the decision to run or the ability to run effectively, because it is very difficult to do as a young parent or as someone who is making decisions about becoming a young parent in the near future.
Now, would any of the councillors or mayor have anything to add to that?
Sure. I'll just, I really want to echo, the comments that Gavin has made around the expectations. And I think it is, it's almost as if we encourage young people to get involved all the time, right? Everybody's calling for, we need young people to run for office. We need young people at the table. But then the expectation is almost that you are engaged and involved as if you're not a young person. So, we have to be able to do the job in a way where our families don't impact in any way whatsoever our ability to do that job. And it's just not the reality. I don't want to give up being a mother to be the mayor. I still want to be able to show up for my kids at their events, and I want to make sure that I have time with them. And I also really care about this job and want to put everything I have into it. So it's about finding that balance. And there are a number of barriers, absolutely. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly one of them. And I think the other one that Gavin mentioned that is very relevant is what happens after this. And I often kind of joke that, I'm a business person. I have a few local businesses, and I've always been really successful in my career. And every once in a while I say, oh, like, what have I done? I really took this like boulder and like threw it in the middle of my career, because mayor is not relevant experience really for anything. I mean, it's, it is in some people's eyes, but it's not like, it's not advancing my education. It's not direct experience for my businesses. And so, we do these things because we get involved because we're passionate, but it comes at a risk. And I think that that's something that is unique to being a younger person in politics.
Mm-hmm. Well, and even running for councillor and then to mayor, that's 8 years. Like that's no small amount of time.
Yeah, people always say in your second term as mayor, and I'm like, oh, slow down. Like another term, I don't know. I don't know if I can think about 6 more years from now. So it is. I mean, with young families, that's that's my kids' whole childhood, effectively, right?
Right.
So it's
Yeah. So on the other side, there's a questions around this balancing of having to also have jobs or businesses or practices, at the same time. Does that create a challenge for you as a politician in making decisions and even perceived decision-making abilities through council? Yep. So Mayor Minions, we know you have a couple businesses.
Sure. So I have struggled with this a lot because I am a local business person. I own the restaurant, or the business that's caused me the most challenges, a restaurant that I own in Port Alberni. I opened it about a year and a half ago. After I got elected, I already owned a restaurant in Tofino. I had been really vocal through my campaign that because people actually criticized me for owning a business in another community. Why aren't you investing in our community? And I had another one here, but people didn't care about that. And I said, I want to open another restaurant in Port Alberni, and I'm planning to. And so I was very clear about that during my campaign. And then I did open another restaurant in Port Alberni, and I've been really, really heavily criticized for every decision that I've made that, has any appearance, even when it is such a stretch to have any connection to my business. And people just take it as an opportunity, as something that they can criticize as well. So I've thought at times about closing my business, or about selling my business, so that I don't have that ability for people to criticize me on it. But at the end of the day, it's, I care about my business, and I care about the employees that I have there. And it's building vibrancy in an area of town that I really care about. So it's difficult. And I think that this is, again, something that I might not face more because I'm a young elected official, but I think I do face more because I'm a young elected official. I'm engaged and active on social media, and social media is where we see a lot of the criticism.
Thank you. So a question I'd love to pose to the councillors, and and the mayor, we may not get to fully explore this, but there's so many, Gavin, you were talking about the importance of not only having diversity and representation in our elected officials, but also to ensure they have the ability and the capacity to lead, right? To be elected and then to lead. So the question is to all of you, what attributes and other factors do each of you feel contributed to you being chosen as a leader? What makes you good at being a leader? How about Councillor Fillmore?
Yeah, sure.
This is the moment you get to talk about yourself in a good way. So we want to hear the good stuff.
Sure. I think one of them is, for myself, is being able to have free conversation. When you go into this job, you have to be a people person. You have to be able to not only talk to people that agree with you, but you also have to be able to talk with people that don't agree with you, and being able to compromise with that. So I think that's one, when you're in the Air Cadet program, the cadet program as a whole is a great program because it teaches you how to work not only with people, but of all ages, because you're involved with youth from the age of 12 to 18. But you do a lot of work in the Legion. So you're with seniors, and you're in the community. So you're with all different age groups. So that definitely contributed. One skill set, or one thing that I learned during my first year in office that has really helped me into my second year, as we just hit our second anniversary of this municipal term. When I was running, I was always told, oh, you're going to have thick skin. You got to have thick skin because you're going to get attacked, and you're going to have this and that. You've got to have thick skin. Oh, great. I don't have thick skin. But when I was talking to, it was actually Mayor Josie Osborne, Mayor of Tofino, or I guess now past Mayor of Tofino. She was doing a panel at UBCM last year. And the advice that she gave on her panel was, you got to have permeable skin because you're going to have to let some things in, filter things out, and then carry on from there. And that one really, I really took that one in. And it's helped me a lot of being able to, because you get attacked. Sometimes when someone's attacking you, you take it as an attack, but it might be an attack. That's just their way of putting something across. So I've managed to be able to filter some things out, filter things in, and work with it. And that's really helped me throughout the job. So that would be my one piece.
Thank you. Councillor Joseph?
What my view, what I've experienced is that if we go and sit with the people and we sit in their homes and we hear what their issues are, what their successes are, what they may need assistance with, really helps them have confidence in you or me to lead, to stand up and share their voices wherever I'm at, whether it be chief and council, whether it be with the province, the federal government, the local municipality, with the business community, wherever, the recreational community, wherever it is, that we bring forth those perspectives in a respectful and transparent way. I think that's really what the people look in us and invest in us and have confidence to bring that forward. And also, secondly, I would say being knowledgeable, having some sort of foundation that they can recognize themselves in, whether that be culture, education, experience, whether you're an athlete, whatever transferable skill that they see in you, that they have confidence in you, that will allow you to sit there in that chair at the decision-making table with confidence and participate in the decisions, and not just sitting back and not having the people's voices heard. That's an attribute that they look for in a leader, and somebody who the people look at that can get out front on the issues and say, we're having problems with education and accessing resources for my grandson or my niece to go to school, to go to post-secondary school or go to daycare, that you'll bring that forward and you'll demonstrate to your constituency that you can represent their issues and their successes and help to find resolve in that. And I think that's what I have personally seen in the last 2 terms. I'm in the middle of my 2nd term here, which is almost 8 years of my life. And it's crazy to think about that. I'm 34 years young and got a long way to go. But certainly, I think they look for that strength within you to be able to represent their interest and have that capacity to do so. And some, in our community specifically, we're entering a trend of electing more and more young people. I'm the youngest. The next one close to my age is 36. And then I think close to 40, and we're a mix between females, males, elders, youth, and that. So we're kind of fortunate in this day and age. So that's been my experience.
So I think I probably should wrap and continue this into our roundtable, Mayor Minions, and Gavin, I'd love your opinion as well on what your research is seeing as well. Yeah. So just really like to put out a thanks to Fortis BC for sponsoring this session and the roundtable that's coming up. Really thank all the panelists, St. Jean's Cannery and Smokehouse. They'll be all receiving gifts from them. And to the audience, thanks for joining us. And we really look forward to continuing this conversation with you at 4 o'clock. So everyone's got time to stretch, quickly get themselves a drink and come back and join us in 20 minutes. Thanks very much.